Well, if you can't beat them, join them. So could Arizona State's Adam Miller follow suit and come to Spokane?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Randy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. But we're talking transfer portal all episode today. First, Gonzaga lost a walk-on forward to the transfer portal. We'll talk about that, as well as a trio of transfer portal targets for Gonzaga, including one who Gonzaga pursued about a month ago, who is back in the transfer portal after decommitting. We'll get to that to close out the show, but we're going to start talking about a player coming out of the Big 12 that Gonzaga has contacted. That would be senior guard Adam Miller, who is in the transfer portal out of Arizona State. Miller spent the last 2 years at Arizona State, also spent a year at LSU, also spent a year at Illinois. He's originally from Peoria, Illinois, 6'3" senior guard. He started his career at Illinois back as a freshman in the 2020-21 season. That was the year that everybody does not have counting against them because of COVID, which is why he still has an extra year of eligibility. As a true freshman at Illinois in the Big Ten, Miller started 31 games. He was all freshman in the he was on the all freshman team in the Big Ten, 25 and a half minutes per game, averaged about 8 points, 3 boards, shot 34% from three on about 5 attempts per game. Then he did not play in the 21-22 season, transferred to LSU, became a player for LSU in that 22-23 season, and had another great year. Coming off of a fantastic season for a good Illinois club. He goes to LSU, averages 11 and a half points, a little over 2 boards, a little under 2 assists, plays 33 games, plays about 33 minutes per game. The three-point percentage dropped, but it was a much higher volume of attempts for LSU in the SEC on over 7 attempts per game. Adam Miller shot 31.5%. So again, percentage isn't great, but the volume absolutely was there for Miller in his lone season with the Tigers of LSU. He then transferred again, this time landing at Arizona State under Coach Bobby Hurley, spent the last 2 seasons there with the Sun Devils as a junior. He averaged 12 points, 3 boards, 1.5 assists. He played 23 games, started 21 of them, about 31.5 minutes per game. And once again, volume of threes was pretty good. Actual effectiveness as a three-point shooter, not so good. 30.3% on about 5.5 attempts per game. And then for the first time in Adam Miller's career, he stayed where he was for his next season. He played another year at Arizona State. This time, though, his numbers dropped, although his efficiency finally improved. The Arizona State had enough guard talent that he wasn't relied upon to play quite as big of a role. He still played 29 minutes per game. It wasn't the volume of shots wasn't there as much as it was in previous years, in part because they had Josan Sano and their star freshman, who's now already transferred to St. John's. A couple other pieces for them. Last year, just had a fair amount of talent on that roster, which is why it was shocking that Bobby Hurley was retained at Arizona State, because they had a lot of talent last year and they were not at all good. They played Gonzaga well early in the year, as we know, but ultimately I think finished 14th or 15th in the Big 12. Miller averaged about 10 points, about 2 boards, about 2 assists, but the three-point percentage, which again, just over 30% his first year at Arizona State, about 31.5% in his lone year at LSU. It was 34% at Illinois. So it's always been under 35%, usually been hovering around 30%. But last year at Arizona State, on 4.5 attempts per game, so a lower volume, but still a pretty good volume. 4.5 attempts per game is not nothing by any stretch. It's kind of about where Nolan Hickman was last year. Miller shot 42.9%, basically 43% from three on 4.5 attempts per game. Nolan Hickman was, I could think, about 5 attempts per game and about 44.5%. So this is not that different from Nolan Hickman's. It's a slightly less efficiency on a slightly smaller volume than what Nolan Hickman did last year, for a reference on Adam Miller. Against Gonzaga in Gonzaga's second game of the year, Miller had 8 points. He was 2 of 7 from 3 in that game in Spokane back on November 10th. He also had 18 points on 5 of 9 shooting in Arizona State's loss to the eventual champion Florida Gators. Also I think it was in November, might have been in December, either way, obviously a non-conference game for Arizona State. And then his season high was 22 points. That came along with 4 rebounds and 3 assists on 10 of 17 shooting. Now, this was a double overtime game, but it was against Texas Tech, one of the better defensive teams, one of the better overall teams in college basketball last year. Point being, he had some good games against very quality opponents. He's proven that. He's played in the Big Ten. He's played in the SEC. He's played in the Big 12. He's played in the Pac-12. His first year at Arizona State was in the Pac-12. So this is a guy who's been around the block. He's played at a lot of different programs. There's obviously some not good with that necessarily, but there's also some good with that. He's experienced a lot of different play styles. He's experienced a lot of different coaching, and he's showed the ability to knock down outside shots at a high clip. Again, the efficiency may not have been great for part of his career, but I think that the volume of attempts is a promising sign of what he would be able to do potentially in an offensive system that I think would be more conducive to his skills were he to come to Gonzaga. However, Gonzaga is very far from the only school that is showing interest in Adam Miller. This is per Sam Kaiser of 24/7 High School Hoops on Twitter. He's a great follow. For those of you looking for constant transfer portal updates, I'm usually cycling through about 5 or 6 different accounts. Sam Kaiser's is one of those. Here's the list of schools that have contacted Adam Miller per Sam Kaiser. This was a few days ago, I think on like Tuesday or Monday of this week. Baylor, Pitt, DePaul, Illinois, West Virginia, TCU, Arizona State, Arkansas, Indiana, Clemson, and Virginia Tech. So a couple of things that stand out there. Return to Arizona State, obviously something that could happen as they are at least still interested in retaining him. Illinois is back on the list here, obviously a school that he played at back in the COVID season in 2020-21. So same coaching staff. Brad Underwood's been there for a while, but certainly could be a return there if he wanted to. He's from Illinois, so that would be the return home would be if you were to go to Illinois. Don't want to discount DePaul. Think it's fairly unlikely he ends up at DePaul, but hey, you never know. Chris Holtman is a very good recruiter. Perhaps they can find a way to get Miller to come back home but play for DePaul in the Big East. Obviously, tons of other programs stand out here. Baylor lost basically their entire roster. They need to replace a ton of people. They've already added Dan Skillings. They've added Michael Ratai. They've added a couple of other great players as well. Wouldn't be surprised to see them make a big push here. John Calipari can never be discounted on the recruiting trail. Pitt has made some nice additions. Indiana with their new coach, Darren DeVries, could make some noise. I mean, there's a lot of really good programs on this list. So definitely something to keep an eye on with Adam Miller, but the fit at Gonzaga is there. And I think historically we'd be hesitant to go after players who've switched schools as often as Adam Miller has, and perhaps the coaching staff still is hesitant to do that. And I don't really blame them, with the caveat being it's becoming more and more common. And so if you need to get mercenaries, if you need to get guys to fill roles, which for Gonzaga, they have a lot of roles already filled on the roster for next year. They have, assuming nothing changes, they have Graham Ike and Braden Huff in the front court. They have Braden Smith expected to play the 1. They have Jalen Warley and Emmanuel Innocente playing kind of these defensive ball-moving roles on the wing. They need a scoring guard who can space the floor. Adam Miller provides that. And I think, again, if you're just going to go out and get a guy who fills a role, I don't think you can be overly concerned with the amount of movement that they have done in their career. And we saw, Caleb Battle was a guy who'd already been at 3 schools before Gonzaga brought him in, and he was an incredibly passionate, dedicated person who loved getting a chance to play at Gonzaga. There was no feeling of him just being, I'm just here to get a paycheck. That was never even slightly something that it felt like with Caleb Battle. So you got to make those evaluations on your own. I trust his coaching staff to do that. But certainly it's something that at least raises some alarm bells still in terms of like, hey, what happened here? Like, why are we moving around so much type of thing? But I am curious how the staff is approaching those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I've said this stat so many times on the show. I apologize for those of you who are everyday listeners. You're going to hear it again. Gonzaga lost 87% of their three-point shooting from a roster that was the worst three-point shooting team in the Mark Few era, according to Ken Pom. A bad three-point shooting team has none of its three-point shooters left. They need to add outside shooting desperately. Perhaps they will get that organically in Steele Venters, who has missed the last 2 years with injury, but perhaps they will not. The expectation is that Steele Venters will play next year, but making the assumption that he will come back at full strength, I just don't think we can assume that at this point until we hear anything more. The players who are back for this team are not three-point shooters. Braden Smith's going to be fine. He's fine. Jalen Warley is not a three-point shooter at all. Emmanuel Innocente, not a three-point shooter. Davis Fogel, that's not been the big strength of his coming in as an incoming freshman. So this team needs outside shooting. They need somebody to start at the two between Smith and Warley. Adam Miller is that. He's 6'3". He's a veteran. He's played in high-level competition. He knocked down 43% of his threes last year. Those are all the things you need out of a player for this Gonzaga roster. So I'm not surprised at all that Gonzaga was one of the teams that reached out to Adam Miller. At this point, we have only heard the list of schools that have contacted him, so we don't have a firm kind of sense of where he's leaning or if he's leaning anywhere at all. But right now, he's the kind of player that makes a ton of sense for Gonzaga. So we'll see if they're able to make a move here and bring him a little bit further west after he's already kind of migrated from LSU all the way to Arizona State. Now let's get him a little bit closer to the coast, coming out to Spokane for his final year of eligibility. Well, folks, Gonzaga has a rich history of developing guards from other countries. Could New Hampshire transfer Sami Pissis be next? More on that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. And with Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts ready to help take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need an extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need someone to help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert to deliver incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, Upwork can help you find multiple qualified candidates to choose from. So instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business effectively. That is so cost-effective. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking transfer portal targets for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. We talked Adam Miller out of Arizona State in the first segment, who the Zags have contacted in the transfer portal. Now we're going to talk about a guy that the Zags actually contacted a little bit ago. I think it was maybe early last week, so it's been like 9-10 days or so. A player there hasn't been a ton of attention on because he's coming from a smaller school, but a player that I think fits in some ways what Gonzaga needs. And in some ways, maybe not so much, which is kind of why I'm intrigued to talk about him, because there's some things about him that maybe don't make a ton of sense for Gonzaga, but also maybe this is the perfect fit. The guy is Sami Pissis. He's coming from New Hampshire, but he's originally started his college career at Southeast Louisiana. He's actually from Paris, France. 6'3" guard from Paris. He did go to high school in Georgia at Trinity Christian High School in Georgia. Then he started his college career, like we said, at Southeast Louisiana as a freshman in 2022-23. While there in his first year of college basketball, he averaged about 7 points, a little under 2 boards, 1.5 assists. He only played 16 games before going down with an injury. He played about 17 minutes a night. In that season, he was a very effective 2-point scorer, about 53% from twos, but he's only about 31% on three-pointers and about 2.5 attempts per game. The injury that cost him about half of that season cost him the next season as well. So he sits out in 2023-24, hits the transfer portal, lands at New Hampshire in the AEC conference, the America East Conference, for this last season, and then blossoms into one of the, and I mean this very literally, one of the most utilized players in all of college basketball by his team last season. Pissis averaged just under 16 points a game for New Hampshire, about 3.5 boards, a little under 3 assists in 31 games, played about 28 minutes per game. The three-point shooting, again, somewhat similar to early career Adam Miller. He took a lot of threes, but didn't knock him down to a super high clip. In fact, this last year, Pissis only shot 29.5% from three. But folks, that was on 7.5 three-point attempts per game. He wasn't very efficient as a 2-point scorer either, 39.5% on twos, which is pretty low. Anybody under 40% on twos, it's a little concerning. But it was also on 7.5 2-point attempts per game. This dude took 15 shots per game for New Hampshire last year in 28 minutes. Mind you, like not even like 36 minutes per game or whatever. You're like, okay, I guess. But like in less than 30 minutes a game, this dude was hacking up 15 shots. He was an all AEC third team member. He was 7th in the conference in points per game, 8th in the conference in three-pointers made, 2nd in the conference in free throws made. He got to the line a lot. 1st in usage rate. first in usage rate in the conference, and folks, fifth in the country. The fifth most used player, according to Basketball Reference's usage rate stat, in literally all of college basketball, 34.9%. That basically means that Pissis was utilized offensively, was asked to score, shoot the basketball 35% of the time that he was on the floor for New Hampshire. That is crazy. Crazy high efficiency, or crazy high usage rate, not great efficiency for Pissis during his sophomore season at New Hampshire. The other list of teams per the Portal Report, another one of those Twitter accounts that I'm cycling through when trying to find updates on the transfer portal. The Portal Report reported that here are the schools that have reached out to Sami Pissis, in the portal. Washington State, Oregon State, Clemson, San Diego State, a lot of Pac-12 flavor there. UNLV, New Mexico, Boise State, more Pac-12, Tulsa, Campbell, James Madison, Murray State, CSUN, Portland, UNC Asheville, Delaware, Charlotte. That is the list of schools who have contacted Sami Pissis in the transfer portal. It's an odd list. It's an odd list because you have a lot of mid-majors. You have some mid-majors that aren't even particularly great. Sorry, Portland, but I'm going to shout you out here. And then you also have not only high majors, but like Clemson, a program that's, was a 5 seed last year, 5 seed the last 2 years in the NCAA tournament. San Diego State, that's been prolific on the men's basketball side for a while. Obviously, Maryland, the Crab Five in that starting lineup, they made the Sweet 16 this past year as well. So that's some really high profile programs, some mid-tier mid-major programs, some lower tier mid-major programs. Obviously, Pissis is a guy who went to high school in Georgia, so you wonder if maybe he returns back closer to home. The 3 schools closest to his hometown would be Clemson, Charlotte, or UNC Asheville. But at this point, it kind of feels wide open. And I think it's going to depend a little bit on what he wants, because my assumption is that these bigger schools, the Marylands, the Clemsons, and yes, the Gonzagas, probably aren't going to give, well, no, I say probably, they're not going to give Sami Pissis a role that is remotely resembles the 5th highest usage rate in college basketball. It's just not going to happen. None of those schools are going to give him that. I'm not sure there's any schools on this list that are going to give him that. Maybe something like CSUN or maybe Portland, I guess, but most of these schools are probably not going to give him a role anywhere resembling 15 shot attempts per game. It's not going to happen. So he's going to have to adjust. And that is where the question comes in. I think he knows that, or certainly if he doesn't, or if he doesn't want to do that, then he's not going to consider the schools that are not promising him that. And that's fine. If he says, no, I want to be somewhere where I'm going to start and play 30 minutes a night, I have a feeling Gonzaga is going to say, well, we're not going to promise you that. And that's going to be the end of the conversation. In fact, that may have already happened. If we're being honest, it may have already happened. But if he does want to go somewhere that has more pedigree, where he could get paid more money, where he could get his name more on the map, he could go somewhere like Gonzaga or Clemson or Maryland and play a role, a more defined role for a bigger program, a program that is more likely to get you, NBA attention, or at least attention from overseas scouts, things like that. But you then have to adjust to that role. Gonzaga has brought in players to do this before with varying degrees of success. The most recent example for Gonzaga is a non-success story, and that is, of course, Michael Ajayi, who averaged 17 and 10 in the WCC at Pepperdine, was the guy, had over 10 shot attempts per game, and yet he comes to Gonzaga to fill a more defined role and struggles mightily to do that. And we've given a lot of airtime to that already. We won't get into it more, but Gonzaga's also had success with players who had high usage rates at their previous schools. And one of the most notable examples is a player that I routinely reference, even though he hasn't been at Gonzaga in half a decade, and that's Ryan Woolridge. Ryan Woolridge, who spent 3 years at North Texas, their best player for the Mean Green, transfers to Gonzaga and very seamlessly handles a role. As a grad transfer, his efficiency balloons up. That's why we call it the Ryan Woolridge effect. You transfer to Gonzaga, your three-point shooting goes up 8 to 10% because you are no longer asked to be, you're no longer the number one option on the other team's scouting report. They're no longer focusing on you defensively. That's where Ryan Woolridge was able to excel. Malachi Smith is another good example, although it took him some time. He kind of didn't find himself in his new role right away for Gonzaga. Once he did, he blossomed into a very good player for Gonzaga as a 6th man in that 22-23 season, but it took a little time. That is kind of what I envisioned Sami Pissis could be if he wanted to come to Gonzaga. Somebody who's like a sixth man microwave scorer off the bench, where you're not asking him to like, hey, I don't want you to just be an Emmanuel Innocente type where you're a ball mover and you're never looking to shoot. Like that's not, we wouldn't recruit you if that's what we wanted you to do, because you're somebody who wants the ball in his hands, who wants to score. So we're going to bring you in, we're going to bring you off the bench. You're going to come into the game and just light it up. And that's what we want you to do. I think that could work. I think Sami Pissis works as a target for Gonzaga if it's in conjunction with somebody else. Maybe it's Adam Miller. Maybe it's Treysen Eaglestaff, who we're going to talk about here in a second. Maybe it's Rodney Rice. He's still available. Maybe it's somebody else that we haven't talked about yet in the transfer portal. I don't think Sami Pissis as your starting two is necessarily the best option for Gonzaga, because I think that he needs to fill a role where he can come into the game and look to score and look to do what he's like. Gonzaga tried to pigeonhole Ajayi into a role that I don't think worked for him. And when they backed off and had him come off the bench and kind of let him create for himself, he got better. Like I said, Malachi Smith took a little time, but he got better when he figured out his role was to still be the same player he was at Chattanooga or at Wright State. He's just coming off the bench and filling that role in a different way. So I think that's the question with somebody like Sami Pissis is, can he fill that role? Does he want to fill that role? Because if not, if he wants to be the man, go to CSUN, go to Portland, go to Delaware, like go, there are other places where you might be able to fill that role, but it's not going to happen at Gonzaga. And I can tell you it's not going to happen at Clemson or Maryland either. So I do think that that is part of the equation here, but it's worth acknowledging, like we said, he was born in Paris. He's from France. Gonzaga's got an incredible history of French basketball players: Kylian Tilly, Joel Ayayi, Rony Turioff, Matisse Kaida. Like this has been a factory of talented French players in and out of this program. So certainly something that they can sell to Sami Pissis in the transfer portal if he's willing to come out to Spokane and play a bit of a different role in his third season of Division I college basketball. Well, I said we're going to talk about Treysen Eaglestaff coming up. He was one of Gonzaga's first known transfer portal targets. He's available once more after decommitting from South Carolina on Wednesday. We're going to talk about that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel has given new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting super easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into all their player props, from three-pointers to steals to assists. FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine your live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Gonzaga's at plus 3,500 right now to win the 2026 National Championship. If you're feeling good, if you want to put that $5 down, then don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're talking transfer portal once again here to close out the show. We talked Adam Miller from Arizona State. In the first segment, we talked Sami Pissis from New Hampshire. In the second segment, now I want to talk about a guy that we've already talked about on the podcast back in late March. That would be Treysen Eaglestaff, the first transfer portal episode of Locked On Zags this offseason was talking about Treysen Eaglestaff, a 6'6" wing from North Dakota, who the Zags were pursuing immediately when the transfer portal opened. They were not nearly alone in pursuing Treysen Eaglestaff. The list of schools that reached out to him when he entered the transfer portal included Kansas, Kentucky, Alabama, Michigan, St. John's. Huge list of very, very high-profile programs. And Eaglestaff kind of surprised some people when he committed 6 days after the portal window opened. So it opened on the 24th. He committed on March 30th to South Carolina, Lamont Paris and the Gamecocks, a team that just this past season went 2-16 in the SEC. Now, the year before that, Lamont Paris was the AP Coach of the Year, and they earned a 6th seed in the NCAA tournament. So I don't want to sit here and pretend that this is like a destitute program or anything like that, but they were really off this past year. They did not have a good year. I don't blame Coach Paris and that staff for saying we need to make a splash immediately in the portal. They went out, they spent big money, reportedly a little over $1 million, to land Treysen Eaglestaff. And that was that. And Kansas and Kentucky and Gonzaga and Alabama and all these schools were kind of left like, okay, well, I guess strike out our first target of the offseason, we'll move on. And then, according to Joe Tipton of On3 on Wednesday, April 16th, about a little over 2 weeks later, Treysen Eaglestaff is now back in the transfer portal, having decommitted from South Carolina. Why? Don't know if we'll ever get a firm answer. I suspect, and we'll see if this matters for Gonzaga or not, but I suspect that the paychecks that we have heard reported, whether, the validity of them, who knows, but we have heard some very staggering numbers for other players in the transfer portal. The one that comes to mind is Rob Wright, transferring from Baylor to BYU for reportedly $3.5 million. I think there's the possibility that Treysen Eaglestaff said, well, maybe I jumped the gun. Maybe I was a little too early in committing to a school when I could, now some of these schools are a little bit more desperate. Kansas, a little bit more desperate. Gonzaga, probably a little bit more desperate than they were before. Kentucky, I'm not as sure how desperate they are. They've made some moves, but some of these programs might be a little bit more concerned and might be willing to up the price tag that they were potentially offering Eaglestaff previously. I'm just speculating. Maybe he doesn't like the fit in South Carolina. Maybe he doesn't like the weather in South Carolina. There's so many different things that it could possibly be. But we're also in an era where money is a driving factor for a lot of players. And for a guy who's probably not going to be an NBA player, who's entering his last year of eligibility, go get your bag, dude. I don't really blame you for doing that if that is what it is. Whether that impacts Gonzaga, I don't know. We don't know exactly what Gonzaga's budget looks like. We know that they were probably spending a lot of money combined on Nembhard and Hickman and Greg and Battle and those guys, and now they have some extra money potentially to spend. But we haven't heard. I mean, I'm recording this just a few hours after it was reported that Eaglestaff is re-entering the portal, so we don't have a firm list of schools that have recontacted him or anything like that. It's possible he makes a very quick commitment. I think he might be hesitant to do that only because of the optics would look kind of bad. If by this time tomorrow he's committed to Kentucky, it's kind of going to look like Mark Pope and Kentucky were tampering a little bit. There's not really any rules against that because it's the wild, wild west in college basketball these days. But from an optics perspective, I think they might at least wait till over the weekend before he makes his next move. But Gonzaga, if they feel like they can make a move here, they absolutely have to give it a shot. This dude, for those who need a reminder, 19 points per game last year at North Dakota. About 3 boards, about 2.5 assists, but he was a 36% three-point shooter on over 7 attempts per game. A high-volume, efficient three-point shooter. He was also 79.5% from the free throw line on 5 attempts per game, and he had some jaw-dropping performances. Young man dropped 40 against Alabama in a non-conference game. No wonder Nate Oates and Bama has been involved with his recruitment. They're like, yeah, we saw what you're capable of doing. We'd love to have you on board here in Tuscaloosa. Eaglestaff also dropped 51 against South Dakota State in the Summit League tournament game. 51. You do not see 50 burgers in college basketball very often at any level. To do that in a conference tournament game is just remarkable stuff from Eaglestaff. He's got great positional size at 6'6". He's a great shooter. He's great at getting to the rim. He converts from the line. He's experienced. He makes a ton of sense. A 6'6", high-scoring two-guard alongside Smith and Warley and Huff and Ike would round out that rotation beautifully. And if Gonzaga could find a way to pony up the cash or make a push to bring Eaglestaff to Spokane, I think it'd be one of the best fits they could possibly find in the transfer portal. Closing out the show with news that came out just right before I hit the record button here. Gonzaga walk-on forward Graydon Lemke has entered the transfer portal. He posted a nice note on Instagram basically saying, I took full advantage of my year at Gonzaga. I got healthy. I loved getting the chance to be here, et cetera, et cetera. That said, I'm going to enter the transfer portal with 4 years of eligibility remaining. He's a 6'10" big man from Las Vegas. He was a preferred walk-on for the Zags, meaning they quote unquote recruited him, but did not offer him a scholarship. The term preferred walk-on is going to become outdated very soon as the scholarship numbers have increased for college basketball. So I don't think we'll see this really happen anymore. Lemke was kind of on track to be a pretty highly regarded high school prospect, but injuries just derailed his high school career to the point where when he came to Gonzaga, he was a 0-star prospect. Like he wasn't a ranked prospect at 247 or Rivals or On3 or any of those places like that. It's worth noting that for Lemke, his older brother, Coleman Lemke, is also in the transfer portal. The older Lemke spent 3 years at the University of Portland, played 46 games for the Pilots, started 2 of them, but only averaged about 5 minutes per game and only scored 1 point per game, scored 46 points across 46 career games. So both Lemke's are in the transfer portal. Does that mean they're going to go to the same place? Not sure. Wouldn't be a surprise if they were trying to do that, whether that's closer to home in Las Vegas. Maybe it's UNLV. Maybe it's Nevada. We'll see if again, Coleman Lemke spending 3 years at UP and barely getting off the bench probably does not make him a super desirable recruit or portal target for schools in the Mountain West. But hey, you never know. Maybe they'll find a way to land somewhere together. I wish Graydon the best of luck. It's obviously tough to see Gonzaga losing players when they haven't been adding players in the portal the way that we've liked to see them do. But for Graydon, I don't know if he was going to be a big time piece for Gonzaga at any point. Most walk-ons are not. So I think, learning what he can learn from Gonzaga and moving on with the rest of his career, certainly not the worst thing for him. So hopefully it works out. All the best to him and to his brother as they look for their new home in the portal. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I'll be back on Friday with some more updates around the Gonzaga space. Maybe talk some NBA Zags, some women's basketball stuff, some more transfer portal stuff as well coming your way later this week into next week as well. But as always, I want to say have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, as always. And until next time, go Zags.